Okay, and thanks to all the other presenters for their insights. So just want to make this short, just to leave a lot more time for Q&A. I've been de-scoped quite a bit from what I had originally planned, given the time limit. So basically just a primer. I've put out a preview on the Slack channel. It's the climate smart, equitable transit development. So basically, just several of those you might already be aware of some of those principles. So for one, I'm just having, especially if you're in one of the so-called superstar cities like New York or the Bay Area, being a no climate refugee or migrant turned away for lack of housing or jobs. And of course, comprehensive upzoning to enable preservation of affordable housing. And to give you some further context, it's mostly taking advantage of natural filtering that would occur if you allow higher construction rates so that existing buildings would only need to cover the operating costs and maintenance costs as opposed to actually being as high priced as a new build structure because of the scarcity. And then, of course, being able to recycle all the land value generated, all the value generated from all those investments, recycle into additional infrastructure, so that instead of seeing TOD being extractive, rather whatever reinvestment, whatever uplift in property values, land values that happens gets reinvested back to the local community. And then lastly, you're probably all familiar with the 15-minute walking city principles. Carlos Moreno, those in Portland, Barcelona, a whole bunch of other cities. I'm doing even many others for decades on, for those who have already been, even without being coined this way. So I'm just having enough of a density to upgrade, to encourage no car-free lifestyles within these clusters. Yep, is it scrolling or not? Okay, so just some sanity checks I've used. Everyone, it's Toshima, Tokyo region, where generally the prevailing floor to area ratio is being anywhere from 2 to 4. And then, as you would notice, so those near the main transit corridors and, of course, the core business district area, actually a sub-district, County Greater Tokyo, would be roughly about anywhere from 2 to 6 or even 8 times the prevailing floor area ratio. And now, we presented earlier, if Marco Chitti is online, Porta Nuova in Milano. Again, similar prevailing ratios of prevailing FAR to the FAR in the transit zones. So those within 5 minutes or even 2 minutes of a rapid transit stop, we call adjacent by definition. And then lastly, go with, as I mentioned earlier during presentation, Metro Town here. Again, a bit lower density given its prior auto-oriented development disposition. But this would be quite relevant to many areas, even within the core New York metro area, that had actually either developed in auto-oriented fashion or had been converted from a streetcar suburb to something more auto-oriented. But this would be more of a legacy. It would be more of a sprawl repair type of job, or even as I suggested earlier, could be something applicable to New York, Jersey, or Jamaica, Queens, which I'll get further in depth later on this talk. So you have seen a version of this put out earlier. So this would just be a model ordinance, model table for zoning resolution amendments to enable location efficient TOD, those areas. And I've just used those as a working titles. You could see they were outlying urban centers and secondary core corridors. Those would be, say, existing towns or activity centers along a regional rail, or outlying areas within the urban core along other rapid transit. And then a bit higher would be 24/7 mixed use spines and secondary core business districts. So for those of you in Queens, it would be areas such as Jackson Heights, Flushing, and then also parts of Sunnyside as well. And that actually gets into the Central Core Business District extensions. Think Long Island City if you're in Queens, or further lower, Jersey City, Journal Square area as an extension of downtown Manhattan for those on the west side of the Hudson. And then lastly, of course, won't find any of those, at least as of yet, in Queens or the outlying inner urban core of New York, but just put that there for reference, as in, I think, Midtown East, Midtown West rezonings for transit core extensions. So now let's geographically focus this on the New York area. Yep, so again, for a number of reasons, focusing on Queens here. So first is pretty well acquainted with close colleague, former exec director of Jamaica Center Business Improvement District, who is now the deputy borough president, overseeing a portfolio on infrastructure in the borough of Queens. And geographically, it's roughly, as you can see by how I positioned this open railway map here, geographically roughly the center of what would be the Central Fair Zone that would extend maybe Newark, Hudson County on the Jersey side, all the way to Eastern Queens and the Rockaways, and then south from Staten Island to the northern city limits. So, and then just zoom in a bit further in this area, these would be just a couple of initial operating alignments that could be built out. And for those of you who are familiar with blog by Alan Levy, Pittsburgh Observations, they have used both. So the red would be things that are not being planned but should be, and then the blue would be existing infrastructure that could use some upgradation or has been some coverage around it. And then here I've just labeled really what would be this core triangle within Queens. You could see with Long Island City, the core CBD, with the Flushing, Willets Point, and then lastly Jamaica. And then labeled also the red ones, so the high priority, the extensions over to New Jersey, with the additional benefit of relieving subway lines in Midtown, and also being able to obviate the necessity of completely rebuilding the Port Authority bus terminal by actually turning the express buses rather into feeders on the Jersey side, given that I'd say probably anywhere from 50, 75% of passengers will be transferring to rail anyway to get to their final destinations in Manhattan or near parts of Brooklyn or Queens from the Jersey side. And of course, all of this, of course, would imply necessary cost control measures. That would mean a cut and cover construction along Northern Boulevard, as you could see here, and then other mixing and matching of best practices around from other parts of the world. We can get to that further in the Q&A section, given the short time we have. So here we have just a brief summary of what the Northern Boulevard is going to entail, enabling at least another 500,000 new residents and jobs supported over the next decade, another 500,000 in addition to that within the region. And then just some overview. So this would be where you could see, as you can see, it's evident, an extension of Midtown East. We already see a extension forming around Queens Plaza and Court Square. Also, will the Hunters Point area being already under redevelopment, with plenty of scope for redevelopment in this stretch between Queens Plaza and the East River shore. And then in between, of course, it could eventually be something that could potentially be comparable to downtown Manhattan as present, though not going from purely a commercial core to 24/7, but from the ground up as a 24/7 CBD extension. Then here, go to Sunnyside, you can see it a bit more clearly, another relatively area, you could see further towards the foreground, a lot of potential for transit-oriented development with a minimal displacement, given most of it is low-value, big box, commercial or industrial. And the industrial use, of course, could then be integrated in the ground floors of new mixed-use mid to high-rise buildings that be going up along this stretch. And then Jackson Heights on the left, you could see Northern Boulevard. And then on the right, you can see where the existing Flushing extension is. So for those, you could see more so between from Flushing side, you could see some of the environment 4 to 6 FAR as opposed to FAR of 1 to 3, and then have a more mid-rise and then some high-rise setback tower forms along Northern Boulevard as well, once the subway trunk is through. And then lastly, Willets Point, which I went over just so briefly for interest of time. And then with the lower Montauk Upgradation, another TOD site, as you could see here, Newtown Maspeth. Say once it's reclaimed and regenerated, again, plenty of TOD potential without much existing residential displacement. And then the upzoning of residential could then be done incrementally, as in going from existing housing you could see here, existing a low rise to somewhat higher low rise and initial mid rise, if you go by that FAR table. And then now lastly with Jamaica, where there's probably the greatest potential, given that it is the busiest regional rail stop in the whole region outside any place in Manhattan. So plenty of TOD potential there as well. And then lastly, just some next steps. Being your own stakeholder engagement is still very preliminary, getting interested parties on board and working in parallel also on some of the value capture financing as well. So I'm just right now, just want to leave it open for Q&A right now. So I'm sure you have plenty. Just kept my pretty brief. Unfortunately, ran a bit longer than planned, but leave open for questions.
Thank you, Yangbo. So we do have a question from William. What are your considerations of ensuring BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color are not displaced with the best practices you are presenting?
Yes, definitely. And that would be integrating, say, especially with community land trusts. It could even be providing reserved equity holdings in those land trusts for those indigenous peoples who laid original claim to the land. And then also, and that's where it also comes in key, is through these land trusts, as in if you are building out, if you are doing this upzoning, it's the land value recycling that would ensure that those who are already there, rather than being extracted out of the region by foreign investors, rather the value accretion would actually go back to the residents in those communities that would be benefiting from the new cores, the new core alignments.